Hey guys, today I'm going to show you how to install the Havoc Offroad 4-inch lift kit on this 2017 Ford F-150. Now before we get started, I just want to let you know that there's going to be a little bit of cutting and drilling on this vehicle. So just make sure you read through the instructions and that you're comfortable with it. Let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing we're going to do is take out these four 13mm bolts that are holding on the splash shield that's right underneath the front cross members. Okay, so in the very back there's also two 8mm bolts that's holding on the splash shield. Okay, and right behind your splash shield, you're going to have this transmission shield. That's going to have two 8mm bolts. So the next thing we're going to do is disconnect the power steering control module right here. And there's going to be these two plugs. And what you're going to do is pull out the little red tab, and then you should be able to push on it and pull it right out just like that. And the same thing on the top one. And they should just pull out. All right, guys. So we're on the passenger side, and the first thing we're going to do on this side is take off all of the brackets that are holding our ABS wire, our brake line, and our vacuum tube here. So it's going to be a 10mm here, and a 10mm here, and then an 8mm right here. So after you take out that last bolt, you can see everything's loosened up. What we're also going to do is we're going to remove the vacuum tube and the ABS wire from this front bracket right here. So that'll just pop out like that. Okay, and I'm also going to remove the vacuum tube from this bracket as well. You can just clip the two sides here. I'm going to use the needle nose pliers. I'm just going to clip the two sides, and then you should just be able to push it through the bracket, just like that. So we're on the back end of the brake caliper, and the next thing we're going to do is actually remove the caliper, and that's going to be two 21mm bolts, this one right here and this one up here. And then once you do that, you're just going to hang it up out of the way. You want to make sure that you hang it in a way that the brake line is not stressed at all. Just make sure that that's loose when you hang it. So once the brake caliper's off, you got that hung up, your rotor will just fall off. Okay, so we're right behind the knuckle, and this is our vacuum line here, and that's what we're gonna remove. You're gonna take a screwdriver and just kind of break the seal on the bottom of it just a little bit. You can see there's some kind of white gunk right there. You can just kind of break that up a little bit, and then this vacuum tube should just pull right off. The next thing that we're gonna do is remove your dust shield so that we can get to your ABS line. And that's gonna be an 8mm. And should be 3 bolts. Next, we're going to use a 5mm Allen key to remove our ABS line. Next, we're going to remove our tie rod from our knuckle, and that's going to be a 21mm. So when you get that nut off, you can kind of just thread it back on a little bit, because we're going to have to strike the knuckle to get it to release. So we're just going to take a hammer or a sledge and just You're going to try to hit just the knuckle. You don't want to hit the tie rod. You don't want to damage that at all. You don't want to damage the threads. So just be careful and make sure you're just hitting the knuckle. And then you'll be able to just pull the tie rod out. Next thing we're going to do is use an 18mm to take off the sway bar end link. And we're only going to remove the top mounting hardware, the hardware that actually mounts to the sway bar. So once you do this on both sides, you should just be able to push it up out of the way, pull that down, and you can just put the nut back on. So the next thing we're going to do is remove the sway bar. There's going to be 2 bolts on your passenger side and 2 bolts on your driver's side. These are 15mm bolts. So next thing that we're going to do is remove the hub dust cap. The next thing we're going to do is remove the axle nut. It's going to be a 13mm. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to take an 18mm and loosen the 3 nuts on the top strut assembly. We're just going to loosen them. We're not going to take them off just yet. Okay, so now I'm gonna loosen the upper ball joint, and that's gonna be an 18mm. And again, once that's pretty loose, you can just wanna put a couple threads on there because we're gonna have to hit this again with a hammer to loosen this whole system. So I'm gonna use a 21mm now to loosen the lower ball joint. Okay, so we're gonna try to release the upper ball joint first. Just again, be careful that you're only striking the knuckle. So once that loses its tension, we can go ahead and remove this nut. It's an 18mm. So you can see once we remove that nut off the top, it kind of loosened up at the bottom. So we can just twist this nut off and then remove the whole knuckle. So the next thing I'm going to do is remove the strut assembly from the lower control arms, and that's going to be two 18mm bolts. So now we're going to remove the lower control arm bolts, and that's going to be a 27 socket and impact on one side, and a 21mm on the bolt side. And you're going to repeat that for both bolts on the control arm. So once we got the nuts off for the lower control arm, we can just pull the bolts through and the lower control arm will just fall off. So now before we take the strut out, we need to mark it as the, we're on the passenger side, so we're gonna mark it passenger side, and then we're gonna mark that as out. So now we're gonna go ahead and remove the three nuts on top of the strut that we loosened earlier with our 18mm. We're gonna go ahead and remove those and remove the strut from the vehicle. You can just pull it down and pull it out. So now we're going to remove the rear cross member, and that's going to be a 15mm on the head side and an 18mm on the nut side. And there's going to be 4 bolts. So the next thing we're going to do is remove the drive shaft, and that's going to be 6 10mm bolts. So now we're going to remove the passenger side CV shaft, and that's just going to make it easier for the differential to come out. But you can just get a pry bar in there and just pry on it a little bit, and it should pop right out. You might have to use a hammer or something, but ours is coming out pretty easily. Okay, so at this point you're going to want to get some kind of jack or something to support the differential. We're going to loosen all the bolts, and then we're actually going to slide the whole differential towards the passenger side as far as we can to give us the most possible clearance. And then we're going to remove the front driver's side bolt, which you can't really see real great right now, but that's why we're going to move it all so that we can get to that bolt and actually remove it. So on the passenger side, you have an 18mm bolt with a flag nut. So the next bolt that we're going to loosen is the rear bolt of the differential on the driver's side, and that's going to be a 21mm. So this is the next bolt that we're going to loosen. It's on the front of the differential, and that's an 18mm as well. So now we're going to use a pry bar and just kind of push on the differential all the way to the passenger side as far as it'll go, and that's going to help us get that bolt out of the differential on the top driver's side. So as you take that bolt out, you'll notice that there's, or there should be anyway, this captured nut here, so you want to make sure you keep a hold of that, don't lose that. So now that we have the front differential driver's side bolt out, we're going to remove the rear bolt next. So now we're going to remove our last differential bolt on the passenger side. So now we're ready to remove the differential. We're going to have to lower it down a little bit and then kind of push it towards the passenger side so that we can get it past this bracket here for the cross member. All right, so as you get the differential down, you're going to kind of have to wiggle it back and forth a little bit. Be sure that you pop out your breather tube. Ours just kind of fell out as we were dropping it. So if you can get your hand up there and pull that out, go ahead. If not, it should just come out as you're lowering the diff. So on the back side of the rear crossmember pocket, we're actually going to have to trim a little bit to make our new crossmember fit. So what we're going to do is we're going to measure the backside from the outside edge of the control arm and measure 4.5 inches across and make a mark there. On the front side, you're going to measure 5/8 of an inch across. So on the front side, you can see we took our mark and we actually made a vertical line going all the way up. And then on the top face here, you're just going to make a vertical line going across, and then it's going to come down and meet the line on the back side. So now that we have all of our lines drawn, we're going to use a pneumatic reciprocating saw to just cut along this line and just cut this piece out of the vehicle. Okay, so now we're just going to clean up these cuts and then we're going to paint this surface and we'll move on. Okay, so we're going to install the rear crossmember momentarily. We're just going to set it up there. We're going to stick our control arm bolts through. Awesome. And then if you notice here on the driver's side, there's another bracket or hole that we need to drill out. So we're just going to stick our silver Sharpie through there and kind of mark that hole on the rear crossmember pocket. And we're going to have to drill that hole to 5/8. We're going to go ahead and remove the new rear crossmember at this time and drill that hole. Okay guys, so we got the differential sitting on a table here. We're going to install our drop brackets, the one in the front top and the one on the passenger side. And the two brackets are going to be identical. You're going to want the bend in the bracket, you're going to want it offset facing forward, and you're going to use the new provided hardware, and this is going to be a 9/16 inch bolt with a washer. And then on the back, you're going to put another washer and a nut. And you're going to have 3 of these bolts that are 9/16. The shortest one, which is 3 3/4 of an inch, is going to go to this top bracket. Okay, and this is the passenger side drop bracket, and it's going to install the exact same way using the longer of the 9/16 bolt with a washer, and then another washer on the back and a locking nut. Okay guys, now that we've installed our drop brackets onto the differential, we're going to go ahead and jack the differential back up into position, and we're going to use the factory hardware to mount the top driver's side location and the passenger side location back into the factory spot. Alright, we got our passenger side bracket lined up pretty good, and we're just going to go ahead and feed our factory bolt through there with our flag nut at the end. Alright, now we have our top bracket in place, and we're going to again use our factory hardware, bolt and captured nut. So now we're going to install our rear crossmember. We're going to use our provided 18mm bolt and washer and feed that through front to rear. And we're going to, at this time, we're not going to put the washer and the nut on just yet. Okay, so we're going to use our last 9/16 bolt with a washer to fit our differential into the cross member in the rear. And you're going to feed that bolt from rear to front, and then a washer and a nut on the back. Alright, so now we're going to install our differential support bracket. and it's going to install right to our drop bracket and to our rear crossmember. So we need to actually take off the nut that's holding on the passenger side differential. Alright guys, so we got our differential support bracket, and you can tell that one side is longer than the other one. The short side is going to go to your drop bracket, and the long side is going to go to your crossmember. And it's going to fit right over the bolt that we put in to the differential. And then you can put your washer and your nut back on that bolt. And then we have a 9/16 by 1 1/4 bolt. It's going to feed through the other top there with a washer and another washer and a nut. Okay, and we're going to use our provided 1/2 inch hardware and go through the bottom of the cross member with a washer, through the bracket with a washer and a nut on top, and then do that at 2 locations. We're just going to leave that loose at this time. Okay, so at this time we're going to go ahead and tighten down all of our differential mounting hardware, and that should be 7 bolts in total, and we're going to tighten those down to 95 foot-pounds. Okay, so our kit comes with a vent tube extension. So before we can put that on, we have to take off the little elbow that they have on here. And once we do that, we can just install our extension. There's the hole, there it is. Alright, so now we're going to install our front cross member. And again, our offset is going to be towards the front. And we're going to install our factory bolts from front to rear. So now we're going to reinstall our lower control arm with our provided cam bolt, washers, and nuts. And the front bolt, you want to make sure you run front to rear, and the rear bolt, rear to front. So now we're going to install our differential skid plate, which is going to mount from our front cross member to our rear cross member. And we're going to use our 1/2 inch hardware, provided hardware, with a washer, and it's just going to thread right into the front and rear cross member. So now we're going to install our sway bar drop brackets on our passenger and driver side. And you can see that there's a hole in the center, and that hole is just going to fit right over the rear crossmember bolt that's sticking through. And then we're just going to use our factory hardware to mount it to the frame. And then at this time we can also put on our washer and nut for our rear crossmember bolt. And again, you're going to want to do this on your passenger and driver side at this time. Okay, so now we're going to torque down our 4 bolts that are holding our crossmembers to the frame. We're going to tighten those down to 220 foot-pounds. Okay guys, so right now, before we tighten down the rear cross member, we're going to tighten down our drop brackets for our sway bar. We're going to tighten those down to 35 foot-pounds. All right, so now we're also going to tighten down our differential skid plate bolts to 65 foot-pounds. So now we're going to reinstall our passenger side CV. And you just want to make sure you line up the threads, and then you can push it on. All right guys, I got the passenger side strut, and we got our strut spacer. The strut spacer for the passenger and the driver side is going to be the same, so you don't have to worry about driver passenger side orientation. It's only going to fit one way, and it's going to slip right over the top of the strut. And we're going to use our 10mm hardware. Should be a washer and a nut. And then we're going to go ahead and tighten those down to 40 foot-pounds. So now that we have our strut spacer installed, we're going to go ahead and install our strut up to the top mounting location. And we're going to use our provided hardware, which would be 3 washers and 3 nuts. Next thing we're going to do is disassemble our factory knuckle. And to do that, we're going to take these 4 18mm bolts out and these 3 8mm bolts out. Next, we're going to reassemble our hub onto our new knuckle. And when you're doing this, you just want to make sure that you assemble it the same way that it came off the old knuckle. So you want your ABS line to be at the top. You want that to be at the top. And you're going to use your factory hardware. So when you're reassembling your new knuckle, you're going to use factory hardware. And you want to make sure you use some red Loctite, because we don't want this knuckle to be able to come apart. Okay, so when you go to put your vacuum hub back on, you want to make sure that the port is also faced towards the top of the knuckle. And you're going to use your factory bolts again with a little bit of red Loctite. Okay, so we're going to tighten our 4 18mm hub bolts to 148 foot-pounds. And then we can just go ahead and snug up our 18mm bolts. Now we can reinstall our dust shield with our factory bolts. Those are going to be three 8mm bolts. We can go ahead and snug these down as well. Next, we're going to install our new knuckle onto our lower control arm, and we're going to use a provided black washer on the bottom of the knuckle with our factory nut. And my phone's going off. We're just going to leave that loose for right now. Okay guys, so once the new knuckle's on the bottom mount, we're going to push it up while we push down the CV and kind of put it all into place. So at the same time, you're kind of going to have to put your strut in to position. So once you get your strut in, you can put your factory nuts back on, and that'll kind of hold everything into place for you to line up your CV to your new knuckle. So once you have the CV aligned correctly within the knuckle, you can go ahead and attach your upper ball joint. And to do this, you're probably gonna have to push down on the knuckle, or push up on the knuckle, I mean, and push down on the arm up here. And you might have to pry on the top a little bit so you get some threads in there, but just like that. Okay, and we're going to tighten our upper ball joint to 85 foot-pounds. Now we're going to tighten our lower ball joint to 111 foot-pounds. Now we're going to tighten our upper strut nuts to 35 foot-pounds. Alright, so we're going to reinstall the factory shaft nut now. We're going to tighten that down to 20 foot-pounds, and then we're going to reinstall the dust cap. So now we're going to reinstall our tie rod, and we're going to use our factory nut for that. And then we're going to tighten that down to 111 foot-pounds. So now we're going to install our ABS line, and before we do that, we're going to actually have to disconnect it from all of these brackets that are kind of holding onto it, because we need a little bit more slack to get it to the new knuckle. Alright, so once you get the ABS line loose, you can just kind of route it right behind the dust cover, and should be able to get it back in its original position. And now we can reinstall our rotor. Alright, so next we can reinstall our brake caliper. Alright, now we're going to tighten these bolts down to 148 foot-pounds. So now we're going to install our brake line relocation bracket, and we're going to just use our factory hardware, and it's going to install right to your frame, like that. Then on the other side, it's got some threads that you can put right through the factory bracket. And you're going to tighten that with a provided washer and nut. Just like that. You can go ahead and snug all that hardware down. So then we're going to use a provided 10mm bolt and washer and go through our factory brake line bracket to the knuckle. So then we can just go ahead and snug that down. And then we're going to use our factory 8mm bolt and secure our ABS line to the front hole in the knuckle. And we can go ahead and snug that one down. So now we're going to reinstall our vacuum tube, and we need a little bit of slack out of that as well. So I'm going to go up here and remove the clip, and that'll give us a little bit more slack. If yours is attached to the brake line bracket with a little zip tie, you should just be able to slide the tube down through the zip tie. If not, you might have to bust it off of there. And once you have enough slack in the line, you can go ahead and just plug it back in. Just make sure you push it all the way down, just like that. So now we're going to install our sway bar to our drop brackets. And that's going to be a provided bolt, washer, and then a washer and a nut. So now we're going to use 9/16 ratchet and wrench to tighten down our hardware to 45 foot-pounds. So now we're going to tighten down our sway bar link to 45 foot-pounds. Alright, so now we're going to install our driveshaft spacer, and we're going to use our provided longer driveshaft bolts. So now we're going to tighten these bolts down to 76 foot-pounds. Okay, so now we're going to reconnect our power steering control module. Okay guys, so now we're in the rear of the vehicle and we're on the driver's side, and the first thing we need to do is remove this bracket so that these brake lines have a little bit of slack when we have to lower down the rear end. All right, we're also going to disconnect our parking brake bracket here. That's going to be a 10mm as well. All right guys, so our next step is going to be to remove the shocks. Now you're going to want to make sure you have your rear end supported really well for this, because once you remove these shocks, everything's going to be a little loose at that point. All right, so the next thing that we're going to do is remove our U-bolts, and that's going to be with a 21mm. Okay, so we're going to lower the rear end on our driver's side. Now that we have the U-bolts out, I'm going to remove the little spacer. All right, so we have our driver's side lift block, and you want to notice that the wing is going to be facing the inside, and it's going to be curved down towards the front. Again, we're just going to lower the rear end until we have enough room to get this in there. We want to make sure you keep an eye on all your brake cables, make sure nothing's tight as you're lowering this down. Alright, we got the block in, we can raise it back up. You want to make sure that the locating pins on your leaf spring are lined up. You might have to tilt it a little bit, but once everything's lined up, go ahead and raise it back up. And then we're going to install our new U-bolts. Now we're going to go ahead and tighten these down. That's a 7/8 that we're using. And you want to make sure you go in kind of a crisscross pattern to tighten them all up at the same time. Alright guys, now we're going to put together our shocks. We need to put a bushing and a sleeve on each side and on both shocks. So I'm going to use some silicone, and I'm just going to spray down the bushing and push it in by hand like that. And then the sleeve also should just push right in. You just want to make sure that that's flush. And you're going to do that on both sides of your shock and on both shocks. Okay, so now we're going to reinstall our new shocks. We're going to use our factory hardware. Alright, now to get the bottom one in, you're going to have to push in on the shock a little bit. Then you can get your bolt through and your nut. And then we're going to go ahead and tighten those down. You're going to want to tighten those down just until you see the bushing start to swell. So now we're going to install our brake line bracket with our factory bolt. Alright, now we're going to use our provided washer and nut to secure our factory brake line bracket. We're going to go ahead and tighten those down. Alright guys, so now what we're going to do is we're going to cut our U-bolts down a little bit so that they're just not sticking down too far below the rear end. Now we'll go ahead and paint the bottom of those bolts just to keep them from rusting. Okay guys, so now we got the truck on the ground with the wheels and tires on. It's under its own weight. We've bounced the front end and the back end a little bit to kind of settle everything. And now we're going to tighten our U-bolts to 120 foot-pounds. Okay guys, so now I'm going to tighten down our struts in the front on the passenger and driver side. We're going to tighten this down to 80 foot-pounds. Okay, and the last thing that we're going to tighten down is our lower control arm hardware. We're going to tighten that to 150 foot-pounds. And you want to make sure you do that on your passenger and driver side. And now is a good time to go back through and just check all your bolts, make sure they're nice and tight, and then go ahead and take your vehicle to the alignment shop. Okay guys, well we just got the truck back from the alignment shop. Now after about 500 miles, you're going to want to make sure you go back underneath, recheck all your torque specs, and make sure everything's good to go. But that completes the installation. If you have any questions, give us a call or visit us online. Thanks.